if you could take a moment and go to thegrowingbanddirector.com to give at least $5 or $3 a month, and it helps the content continue to be created for you to help our profession grow. Let's go back to our scheduled episode. Welcome back to the Growing Band Director podcast. This is episode number 249. I'm here with Chris DeVona from James Madison University. Chris, how are you?
I'm great. How are you today?
Beautiful. Thank you. So you've been at James Madison for 2 years now, and before that you were teaching in Connecticut. Am I
Ye
am I right on that?
Yep. This is year two at JMU.
Beautiful. So what brought you to JMU?
The band program. I mean, it's I've met so many people from the band program over the years in drum corps and through the marching band sort of arena that I'd heard so much about the program. I'd had my own former students go to JMU in the band program, through drum corps stuff, and I just heard so much about it. So when the job opened up, someone actually sent it to me. I kind of chuckled a little bit and said, "Oh, that's cute. They need a really good band director." And then a couple weeks later, someone forwarded the same post again, and I said, "Okay, fine. I should go send them an application and see what happens here." And then the rest is there.
Beautiful. And we were talking off air that you're a French horn player and trumpet
Mhm.
player. Like any good musician, you're a trumpet player, but also a French horn player. I joke in jest, of course.
Are you a
French,
trumpet player then?
I am, yeah,
Oh,
but
that was
not
it.
a, not a good one. So, um, so when we're talking about French horn, I just have some sort of thoughts, and hopefully you can help us a little bit. Um, what are some characteristics of students who are good French horn players? Like as people are looking in their, especially young bands, for kids who might switch to or start on French horn, what are some things we're looking at in characteristics?
Fo Folks who have a really good internal sense of pitch is really important. I mean, you've probably heard this a million times, but on horn, the rule is really if you can sing it, you can play it because the horn is not doing you any favors with the buttons. I started as a clarinet player, and it's beautiful on clarinet. You push the right buttons down, you cover the holes, and the note comes out for the most part. And there are other challenges involved, but with a horn, you push the right button, and you're still up a creek with notes. You don't get any help from the instrument. People joke all the time. They say, "How do you find the right note? Isn't it hard to find the right pitch?" And the return to that is, well, I can push the wrong buttons all day long and still get the right note out. And half the time we do, and that's okay. So that's really like the number one thing that that we look for is like find students who can find a pitch and hum a pitch in their ear and reproduce intervals on their own as best they can before they start the instrument. Because again, it's got to be internalized before it'll ever come out the instrument.
And just a brief moment for some people who maybe don't know the difference between a single horn and a double horn, like in what it is and what it looks like.
Sure. So a single horn, or I guess a double horn, has a thumb button. A single horn does not. A single horn is an F instrument by itself. It's just like if you were to take a trumpet and stretch it out and then make it one and a half times as long, that's an F horn, and then you wrap it in a circle, put some rotary valves on it, and that's an F horn, a single F horn. The double horn is a B flat horn and an F horn all wrapped into the same thing, but they happen to share one lead pipe and one bell. But as soon as you hit like the first curve and you hit the first valve, it splits it like you can imagine the mouthpiece there, and it splits into two instruments with two separate sets of valves. And then at some point, the tubes combine again, and out goes the bell. So it's two horns wrapped into one, and the thumb button redirects the air to the F horn or the B flat horn. The B flat horn being the perfect fourth higher, so the smaller instrument. That's why, like, when you look at it on a double horn, you'll see like the first valve tube, and then there's another first valve tube under it. One of those, the top one is the B flat tube, the bottom one is the F tube.
And for anybody who just has single horns, like they don't have any at their school, I mean, you and I know that when you start a kid, especially like a single horn is harder to play than a double horn. When it comes to being secure in the pitches, right? It's easier, especially as you get higher. Do you agree with that or disagree?
Uh, uh, It's kind of one or the other. There are pros and cons to both. I mean, I start students on a single horn for sure, unless they're starting in high school or older, which is probably not worth it. The single horn, it does get more difficult on the higher pitches because the partials are closer together,
Mhm.
but the amount of control you need on a single horn is a little more manageable compared to the double horn. The double horn, it's a bigger, bulkier instrument, and it takes a little bit more not physicality, but it takes a little bit more control to manage that. So the double horn has its own challenges in just playing like a heavier, more weighted instrument. And also, there are multiple fingerings. At some point you have to switch over from single to double, and you have to relearn some fingerings, which can get tough. Um, but that sort of goes along with like learning the instrument. When you learn a brass instrument, you figure like, okay, I have these open notes, and then the middle vowel is a half step. That one's a whole step. The two of them together make a minor third. And if you're sort of introducing that idea as you go with the single horn, then when you suddenly switch to the double horn, it's not such a jarring experience, because you do end up with some valve combinations that are like, they look like a half step apart. Like, on a single horn, you'll probably play the D natural, fourth line D natural with your first valve. When you go to a double horn, you're playing it one and two with the
Mm.
thumb. And for a lot of folks, that looks like it's a half step off. But when you start to think about, if your students really understand like what's going on with the valve sequence there, I think it makes it a little easier to manage and sort of reconcile that difference when they have to switch fingerings suddenly.
That's interesting. You threw me for a loop because I've never talked to anybody who doesn't say double horn right away. And I'm really glad that you said that. I never
Oh,
thought
oh
about the
boy.
extra. I never thought about the extra weight or
Yeah,
it
it's
being more
big.
cumbersome.
And so, like I said, I grew up in Connecticut. I know you're up in Maine. And at least in Connecticut, most elementary schools start instruments in fourth grade for band.
Hmm.
Now in Virginia, I live in a world where it's mostly grade six. But for a fourth grader, that's a big instrument for a small kid. It's just, it's a lot of stuff. The same way, fourth graders struggle with a trombone or a tuba because it's just a big instrument on
Just
a
big.
small person.
Yep.
The same way, the double horn, it's just a heavy instrument. It takes a bit more to play it, honestly. It takes a slightly more grown person.
Well, it's definitely a legit point. That's for sure. Um, so then let's just talk right hand for a little bit before we leave French horn.
Yeah,
I know so many things I've seen over my career. What are some things? So first of all, it's hard to fix the right hand because from the podium you can't see the hand, right?
true.
And the
Yeah,
kids will kind of go to the laziest possible thing. What are some things we should be
typically.
looking out for, and maybe what does it sound like when their hands in the wrong spot?
Um, Usually, this is going back like when I was teaching high school and middle school more. The most frequent problem I would have is that the students who had learned in fourth grade how where to put their right hand. And sometimes that was the last time somebody checked on their right hand position was about in fourth grade. And then they go
Mm-hmm.
to middle school or high school, and to no fault of their own, their directors don't think about the hand position, but usually it's a very muffled sound. It either comes from having their hand too far in or pointing the bell directly into their stomach, and it's all getting absorbed by their shirt. And usually, what I would have to ask my middle schoolers and high schoolers to do is like actually angle out a little bit, um, just to learn, like, when you're a fourth grader, you're only so big, so you have to hold the instrument however you can. And with a smaller hand, it does have to sit a little further in because you don't have as much volume of hand there. So usually with the high schoolers, yeah, I would come in, or even like when I go work with like a district band or region band, whatever now, oftentimes I'll listen to the horns and it's just very stuffy sounding. And I'll kind of an adventure back behind the horn section, and I'll look, and most of their hands are like almost stopped entirely inside the bell. And you just have to remind them like it's okay. Like, if you open up a little bit more, you can start to use that hand to control things. Granted, that's one where you really need to find a horn teacher who can help you, uh, use your right hand to change what you need to change. Then there are a lot of different ideas about that. Different teachers have all sorts of different methods and philosophies on doing that. I don't dabble in that at this point, but different teachers will say different things about like how much you cup your hand for particular notes, or if you tend to shade notes a particular way with your hand position. But all of that is only available when the hand is actually far enough out that you can start to manipulate. And finding that sweet spot is it's challenging because if you come too far out, it just gets too uncontrolled and it flares out too much. If it's too far in, it's too stuffy and you never hear anything. So finding that sweet spot is really, that's the challenge.
And I think the big takeaway for a lot of people, if they didn't know that already, is that the right hand does affect the sound on the French horn, and
Absolutely.
in
Yeah.
good ways and in bad ways.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's like putting a mute on a trumpet. Like, it
yep,
can't not affect, if you put a balloon in front of your trumpet and try to play, you're going to get some really funky sounds. And that's what your hand is doing behind the bell.
yeah. If you're a band or orchestra director looking to streamline your rehearsals and help your students take ownership of their intonation, you need to know about Tuner Caddy. It was invented by Mark Casperson, a veteran band director with 38 years in the classroom. Like lots of us, he was tired of drop tuners, scattered materials, and constant reminders. So he created a solution, and after 57 prototypes, the Tuner Caddy was born. It's been used by some of the most respected programs in the country. Mouse Middle School, Cooper Junior High School, Arbor Creek and Creek Valley, Rushing Middle School, Stiles and Grisham Middle Schools, and the Henry Middle School Band, which was a 2024 CCC Honor Band of Texas. These aren't just good groups, they're the best of the best. And when they step on stage at Midwest, TMEA, or Music for All, many of them have Tuner Caddy right there with them. It's been used by university music ed professors to help train future teachers because it works. The classic fits most stands and includes a pencil holder. Student Pro is slim, binder ready, and magnetized, and the new tuner metronome combo transposes and has a 6-foot mic, ideal for students and directors alike. You can get them at tunercaddy.com, Music and Arts, Sweetwater, Premier Music Teaching Aids, and local retailers. They even offer grant writing support for educators. Check them out. Teachers, do you spend valuable time all year correcting your students' hand position instead of focusing on the music? Thumb Gummy solves that. These simple, cost-effective teaching aids fit on trumpets and trombones to guide the right hand into proper playing position, reducing tension, improving form, and giving tactile feedback so students can focus on playing, not adjusting. It's easy to use, comfortable, and designed by teachers and players for beginners as well as older students. Join thousands already seeing the difference, and keep an eye out for our new clarinet thumb rest coming soon. Visit thumbgummy.com to learn more. That's thumbgummy.com. Excelsior Music Publishing is proud to sponsor the Growing Band Director podcast. With spring concert season on the horizon, Excelsior Music Publishing is proud to offer a vast catalog of inspiring concert band and jazz ensemble pieces that will be right at home on your spring programs. You'll find works by imaginative composers for all levels. Find music for your graduation and spring concerts at excelsiormusic.com. That's EXCELCIA music.com. Well, I appreciate you meeting with me today. I know I reached out after you did a Facebook post about your book selling out at Midwest at the GIA booth. Small band, big sound, right? I have that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Through GIA. That was super cool. I mean, I don't know if they only brought 2 copies and they sold them all, or if they brought 30 or whatever, but I just saw the title, Small Band, Big Sound. And I know there has to be so much great information in here. So can you tell us a little bit about sort of, yeah, let's
We hope
hope,
so.
right? First, people should check it out, and I'll put a link in the show notes so people can go buy the book as well through a GIA. I assume it's in stock. They just didn't have it any more copies at Midwest.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about sort of the genesis of the book. You know, how did you get approached to write it, or things like that?
So, I guess it started from my own adventures with a small band trying to figure it out. You know, I grew up in Connecticut. I went to a fairly large band program. You know, we always had 3 concert bands, a big old marching band, a couple jazz bands, and you know, there was just always stuff. And then I went to college, and like most college programs, there was, you know, one fully staffed wind ensemble and at least one, you know, gargantuan symphonic band, and whatever happened. And when I started my first teaching job, I came in and there were, I think I gotta remember this right. I think there were 14 students in the concert band.
Mm.
And I remember walking in and going, okay, like listen to the tubas is not going to work because they don't exist. You know, and that, you know, the instrumentation was something sideways. I mean, we had like a handful of woodwinds, way too many saxophones. One trumpet was our entire brass section, you know, and that, you know, 2 pianists and a guitar player on top of that. And I remember thinking like this is not going to work. You know, like nothing that I've done so far has really prepared me for this particular instrumentation. You know, certainly like, you know, I felt confident in my ability to teach students, and I could work with them and I could explain things, I could help them figure things out, but just the sheer instrumentation and that's sort of that background idea, like we should still make the band sound good. You know, there's a lot of great educational content out there. You know, the focus is on, you know, a ton of different aspects of learning that are a little bit more individual based, but you know, sometimes you still just have to fall back on that old-fashioned idea, like the students are going to have a great time if going to have a better time if you make the band sound great. And that's sort of where this book takes off. It's a little bit more like boots on the ground. How do you get a great ensemble tone? How do you work on balance when balance is not convenient with instrumentation? How do you mess with parts, you know, music that you have where you have parts missing there? And you know, what can you do with stuff there? And so that's really where it came from, was my own adventures trying to figure this stuff out. You know, I do a lot of arranging. I had done a lot of arranging up to that point, and that's sort of how I survived when I was teaching that group. Is I just arranged all the music for them, or I adapted all the music I had to, and we sort of made our own content as we went through. And so a lot of that info that I figured out and learned and went into that book. You know, I started going to work with other high schools in the area when I was there. You know, colleagues from other schools would hear the band, you know, would hear our band and say, that's a really great sound. Like, how did you do that? So I'd say, well, I don't really know how we did it. Like, let me come visit your band and we'll figure it out together.
Mm.
And so I started visiting more and more bands around, and I kind of find myself going back to the same ideas over and over and saying, saying the same or similar things and trying the same sorts of patterned ideas with different bands. So eventually the idea I came across, I said, well, if I'm going to keep going to tell people the same thing over and over, I might as well just write it down.
So what are some of the most common ideas that you would have and that you say with bands?
I'd say the big one is finding a common tone, finding a common sound, and that's something like large bands work on a ton. And that's sort of that's a through line for the entire, like the whole book is like, look, we have a ton of great ideas. Like you go to any conference, any session, and they have a million great ideas on how to make a band sound great. But most of those ideas are based on, four French horns, two bassoons, three tubas back there, an army of trumpets somewhere back there, an ocean of clarinets, and these sort of ideas that come out of like the mixing and matching of timbres and the balancing and adjusting tone quality to meet one cohesive band sound. And there's a ton of great content out there for how to do that with a big band, but doing that with a small band is challenging because when you've got, two flutes, five alto saxophones, and a kazoo, it doesn't work super well. So that's sort of where we would start all the time. You work on that same like chorale type material, you play something slow, you play a whole note even, just make the whole note sound good with those instruments and how to blend your sound together so that you can find one cohesive band sound again or move towards, a sound that's a little bit more separated. If you're playing something, in repertoire wise, where the music calls for that, you're playing a march, you want the umpas to be a little bit on the bottom layer, and you want the melody to shimmer on top because that's generally what marches sound best with. So, how do you carefully match the instrumentation, and how do you match that tone quality, whether through balance or through just adjusting the way you play to make that come through?
And we all want a lot of lows, all the instruments. We all want the full pyramid of sound. But if you think about it, you could hear a trumpet trio, and if they're world class, you'd listen to them all day.
Exactly. There's wonderful music that has no bass. And that's, it's something that it takes a lot of time to go adjust your ears and find those ensembles. Again, we all live with, the great band recordings that are out there. We find the old Illinois recordings, we find the North Texas recordings now, and that they sound fantastic with balanced instrumentation. I think most band directors out there who are teaching, they've got a pretty good sound in their mind of what does a full symphonic band sound like. They know what the wind ensemble sound is, and they know what kind of sound they're looking for. I don't know if as many band directors have like, a pristine image of what it should sound like with a weird combination of instruments. Better yet, whatever combination of instruments happen to sign up for your band class that year. But you're right. Like, there are trumpet trios out there. You go listen to, like old like harmony music where it's, one flute, two oboes, two bassoons, two horns, and two clarinets. Like, there's not really any good bass in there. They got like a bassoon maybe, but there's beautiful music that happens there, and they have a cool blend. It just doesn't sound anything like a wind ensemble.
So I think the ability to try to grow a program and try to get more of those instruments, but in the meantime, obviously making the best music that you can. Like you don't want to give up and go like we're never going to have a tuba. Well,
Right.
you just can't do it always right away. In a chance to, we're not trying to be accusatory here, but just from your sort of thoughts, what are some of the mistakes that band directors might make when selecting music for their bands to perform, especially if they have small bands?
Well, this one's not unique to small bands, but trying to find music that you just want to conduct. That's never a great idea, right? You want to think about what individual performers are doing. And really like without oversimplifying, you've got to pick music for the students you have and for the band you have, not for the band you want to have. Don't get fooled by a great demo recording. Even a lot of flex band music, like published flex band music, you find the demo recordings and it's a full band over there playing, which is, in my opinion, a little bit ridiculous. Like you find these flex band things and there are at least 45 people playing on the recording. You're like, this is not realistic. This is not what this is going to sound like. So trying to be really careful, like look at the music carefully, like look at the score. I never bought anything. If I can't find a full perusal score, I still don't buy anything if I can't find a score. Look at the score and start doing some score study. Make that aural image of what you're going to hear and start to like cross out the lines you don't have and say, okay, well, if I don't have that line, does this music even work? And you've got to think ahead about the instrumentation you have and what it's realistically going to sound like. And generally, I find that being a little more conservative with your repertoire choices gives you a little more wiggle room when you're teaching because then you're
Hmm.
not just trying to survive. Then you can really experiment, you can teach, and you can move a little more than being, really strapped down to just trying to function and make it work. And I think that's the biggest one. Teachers, they just pick music that's over-programmed, not in difficulty or in length, but in instrumentation.
Hmm.
There's no substitute if you've got four DVC clarinet parts and you've got two clarinet players in your class. You're missing two parts. Like there's nothing you can do about
Hmm.
that unless you rewrite stuff. But that's a different chapter.
And when it comes to difficulty, I think the same thing. I think a lot of us, we overprogram. But here's also another side of it. From difficulty, you want everything to be within the pocket and really fit them so they can master for the concert. But also think about, okay, how long are you going to rehearse this? What can you get them to grow to? Because we obviously don't want to just stay the same difficulty all year long. You want to try to help them grow into more challenging music. So, I'm not sure if there's an answer or question there, but just a thought of when it comes to difficulty that yes, under program, but continue to push them at the same time. It's just I find that the more I teach, the better I know the students. And the better I know the students, the better I can find repertoire that will help them grow while still being in their sweet spot.
Absolutely, and that there's always a bell curve on your program. You've got some pieces on there on every concert cycle, every unit that you do. There are some pieces that they should probably just sight read the first time. You've got the bulk of it that's like right in the pocket for where you can work, and then that one reach piece to say, we might not even get that clean, but it's good to practice it. It's good to try it. It's good to learn it. And there are probably some students in your class who need that repertoire over there to really stretch their abilities. You've got some students who are really achieving on that music, and you've got some other students who are hanging on for dear life on that music, but they're still learning things and they're having a great time.
So one final question before we get into the meat and potatoes of the book, which we're going to give us some information, but people still need to go buy it and read it and support it. And I know you sort of answered this already, but I wonder if you have a different answer for it when I ask it. What are some specific things to look for within pieces when trying to find music that would make small bands sound their best? I know you already said, obviously, make sure you can cover all the parts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, the big one, look for counterpoint. And I know that that's a complicated thing because, lots of folks have a different understanding of what counterpoint is or isn't. Look for music that plays horizontally, where every line on the page creates its own interest and its own contour. It's really its own melody that combines with several things together. Counterpoint, like having a great melody, a good counter melody, and a bass line is fantastic. Having a great melody, three harmony parts and a bass line is not going to sound great unless those three harmony parts can actually match and be one consolidated layer of music. And again, that goes back to like, the big tools that a big band has that a small band doesn't. With a big band setting, you can have tubas playing a bass line and you can have an entire trombone section voicing out triads down there underneath one melody that sits in a clarinet or a flute or something, oboe, whatever. And it sounds great because that harmony line all sits in that very like homogeneous layer of music. It all sounds like it, well, it's three trombone players, right? It sounds like one quality of sound matching all together. If you're dealing with, an alto saxophone and a bassoon and a trombone and a guitar, those things don't match at all. And if they're trying to match, a very like vertically written chordal thing, it's much more difficult to blend that together than if each of those lines is just playing their own
Hmm.
melody, right? Melodies, our ears want those things to live separately. They want them to exist in their own timbral space. So look for music that plays horizontally where everybody has their own interesting part, not just an arbitrary note of a chord that's hammering away beneath a melody. And that's the big one, that's really the number one thing I would look for. Horizontal, contrapuntal music.
That's great advice. The first half of the book is about selecting repertoire
Mhm.
for the group. So, a guide to flex music, what to look for, and some recommended flex band arrangements.
Yeah, so it's the whole first half of the book is real. It's just kind of tries to harp on the fact that you have to pick great music. The repertoire we pick, it's our curriculum. And the first chapter is, I think, where most people begin their journey with that is like look for what exists, look for flex band music that other people have written, because there's some great stuff out there. But I think knowing the variety of stuff that's out there is important. There are so like most big publishers have begun doing some kind of flex band music because they recognize that it's an important thing that we need. Like as band directors, we need that music. There are folks out there who depend on it, and from a business perspective, as a publisher, there are people who will buy it, so make it. But recognizing that there's a lot of variety in what's out there. Some flex band things have percussion parts. Some flex bands don't have percussion parts. Some flex band things come with like a piano part and a guitar part. Some do not. Some flex band parts are written so that they can be played by any four instruments. Some of them are written so you have like part one can only be a flute, an oboe, or a clarinet. Part five can only be a bass clarinet or a tuba. And when you're looking at that repertoire, knowing that if you don't happen to have any of those instruments on part five, then you're still missing the part, or you're stuck on a
Hmm.
notation software trying to type things out and transpose them for your students, which that's just never any fun. Um, so knowing what's out there and having that as a tool to try to look for the stuff that's really matched the ensemble you have, right? Because even a flex band music, if it's not the right flex band for your band, it's still not going to get the job done, right? And you're still going to be fighting instrumentation to try to make music before you can even get to those next steps of learning and rehearsing.
There are so many hundreds of thousands of pieces out there, and this year you're only going to do 20 or 10 or whatever it is. So really, I love you talk about being like really picky and basically trying to customize the music for your kids, even if you're not arranging it, like finding pieces that are like right in the sweet spot for them, I think is really important. The late great John Thompson from New Trier High School out in Chicago taught me one time, the difference between, he learns from John Payne, or the difference between symphonic band music and wind ensemble music. I know we're not talking about that now. We're talking about smaller
Yeah,
bands than that, but some music, you just need bodies. Some music, I mean,
100%.
unless you're the Marine band, that like you really need to have, like if you're doing Rosa Medre, if you do Rosa Medre with one clarinet on a part, I mean, you can do it, but you really need multiple bodies. A lot of the Alfred Reed stuff is really symphonic
Right.
band stuff, whereas, some other things you can do with the lesser instrumentation. I mean, I'm talking full instrumentation, but so there is even that thought too of, even if you were covering everything, should I do this piece when I only have one on a part versus
Right.
I really should have 12 trumpets to play this rather than three or four trumpets. Um,
Exactly. Like all that like mid 20th century band rep that's written for, like the Michigan band, you always read those things like at least 27 B flat clarinets. You're like, yeah, okay. Like no one has that anymore. But it's just right, like that music was written for that massive band where, it's the string section of clarinets over there. We just have a ton of players. And there's some stuff that's like that very wind ensemble, like I'm going to own my part because I am the second clarinet and I'm the only one doing it.
this past concert with one of my groups, we did the Bach Prelude and Fugue in G minor, and
Oh yeah.
you're listening to the old Ravelli recording from University of Michigan, and it's like yes, but you can tell they have 34 clarinets, and it's I didn't do it until I had 10 clarinets in that group because I wanted to have that breadth of sound, and I just want people to think about that. So when you talk about writing your own flex music, can you give us some hints when it comes to maybe taking a piece you want to do and turning it into a flex piece for your school?
Sure. Well, my first bit of advice is double check your copyright, but that we'll put that under the assumption. You the same kind of idea happens comes in, when we talked about looking, what music should you look at for flex band music? What That's the same idea for when you're looking to make flex band music. You should be looking for those same things and look for music that's very contrapuntal. Look for music where every part has its own interesting horizontal contour, not where you're trying to recreate, this block harmony sound. Block harmony is the enemy of small band everywhere. It just doesn't, it's not really compatible with that ensemble. So look for music where you can give a horizontal character to it. Look for music that's very melodic in nature. Things that'll translate well to a wind instrument tend to work very well. Avoid music that's just a lot of whole notes in a row. Like whole notes isn't like those like big massive like volume impact moments. We've all heard some concert band music or lots of orchestra music where there's just like a wall of sound happening for 8, 10, 12, 20 bars at a time. That stuff is really hard to do with a small band because managing a sense of blend and balance through that extended period of time
Mm-hmm.
is darn near impossible, right? When you've got a massive, string section or you have, a large brass section who can keep doing that, they can stagger breathe, or stagger bow, or just keep playing. That those things work well with those large groups. In a small group, there's no really hiding those things. When players breathe, there's going to be a big gap of sound because it's, again, like if you're the only trombone player, all of the trombone section disappears when you breathe. And, of course, you should plan for your players to breathe when you write, wood parts. Um, so I think that would be it. Just look for music where the horizontal part is really interesting for every player, not just a part of a chord.
Yeah, and if they're asked to play loud, it just can't be for long, right? It's got to be
Right?
very small amounts of time.
Exactly. Arrive somewhere and then go away.
Yeah. But soft music is great. I mean, if I had to choose one, I'd take soft over loud any day. So
Right.
you
And
you can play soft.
the other part of it too, like, it's even when you want impact or you want intensity, it's not always about volume. Like the density of the writing is often way more impactful than the volume of it. If you get music that's very dense, you can get a lot of intensity out of that. You can get a lot of like arrival and impact. You can get that same sense of complexity if it's just, you know, it doesn't have to be loud. If the parts are just moving around each other and they're dancing in such a way that creates this sense of motion and activity, you'll get that same effect. But like you said, without having to play so darn loud.
The second half of the book, you talk about specific rehearsal strategies to help get your band to sound its best as a small band. What are some specific rehearsal strategies you recommend when you're rehearsing a small band?
Yeah, I mean, some of them are the same as big band music, like play chorales, play simple, lyrical things that encourage folks to work on their airflow and work on their tone and tuning and phrasing. Do the same kind of stuff, play your Bach chorales with a small group, but f change the focus of it so that it's not just about the phrasing of it. Put a lot of attention into how are we blending our sound, how are we matching our sound, and then start to flip the parts. I think more so than you do in a large ensemble. Large ensembles lend themselves towards, tubas play the bass line, the flutes have the soprano line, and we sort of have this like natural order of instruments that happen there. But with a small band, start flipping things upside down as much as you can. Take if you've got three alto saxophones in there by chance. I always assume they're more saxophones than we perhaps want in a small band. It's the way it works, and that's great. We love saxophones; they're useful. But if you have three alto saxophones, don't put them on the same part. Move them over. Spread them apart between soprano, alto, and tenor. See what that does to the blend of it. With having one common sound across most of the voices there. And then, change it the other way. Put all the brass on this part, put all the woodwinds on those two parts, and start to experiment with the sound a little bit more to hear what are the different combinations of sound that this year's group of instruments can make. And that's, a lot of like September, August, whenever you start school, that's the time to do that, is just start experimenting and see what are the different qualities of timbre that this group of instruments can achieve and what are the ones we like, what are the ones that we don't like, and just start experimenting. Again, falling back to that idea, large bands, there's a lot of literature there. There are a lot of conference sessions. There are a lot of, great teachers out there who have really good ideas and really good things to share with us about how to mold the sound of a band, all geared towards a large band. So we have to recreate those things, all of those experiments that, band directors of history have done, and they've arrived at some good conclusions. We have to kind of start over with that and say, okay, what sound can we make? And then what pieces of music are going to be useful for that sound? If we can find one particular orientation of instruments that sounds a little bit brighter and a little bit more brilliant, maybe that's a good one to do for the march. If you can find one that sounds much warmer, much more tame, maybe that's good for the lyrical tune, or however you want to do that, but just learn what does the band sound like and be open to that process. Don't come into it with an idea and say it should sound like this, it should sound like that. Keep an open mind and let your students contribute to that. They'll love the opportunity to say, wow, like that sound was really interesting. I feel like that instrument really stuck out in this particular setting. You're like, yes, it did. Like, and that becomes a good conversation. Like that could be really useful when they have a solo. That's really not useful when they have a background part. So let's
Mhm.
think carefully about, what repertoire are we going to do that complements the sound we can make? But it all kind of falls back on that idea, like you have to know what sounds you can make.
And just you're requiring the kids to listen, just
Yeah,
as much as if they were with a big band, even down to two players. Say you have an alto part and it's literally a clarinet and a trumpet. You might say, okay, we want 60% clarinet and 40% trumpet, or
absolutely.
like get the trumpet into the clarinet sound or play with the balance of just two kids, and then but the bigger human experience is that they're listening to that other person. And what other
Right.
trumpet player doesn't get better by playing with a clarinet player?
Yeah, it's great. And that clarinet player, like their throat tones are going to be a lot more in tune because they've got a trumpet who's on some really good notes there. And
Yep.
you learn that same, like you learn about the contour of your instrument. As soon as you're on the throat tones, the clarinet's going to disappear. But you go over the break and suddenly the clarinet is is outshining like a million decibels above that trumpet player. And for the clarinetist to learn, like, your instrument has a pretty significant dip right there, and then the volume suddenly gets a lot louder over the break. Like that's a thing you have to learn to manage and control, just kind of fighting the elements of the instrument, so to speak. And that
And
like that experience does it, playing like, yeah, I like your example, the clarinet and the trumpet, like they'll learn a lot from that.
we were just working on a bebop line with one of my jazz ensembles, and it's like a tenor and a trumpet, and they were playing in
Mm,
octaves, and they're both playing it, but it's like, yeah, the tenor really needs to be as loud as the trumpet in this. So can you play out? Do you hear that you're the lower octave and you're the upper octave? I was
mm.
like, oh, that's cool. And it got the tenor player to play out, and it just totally changed the sound. It's like we don't think of it sometimes as proportionary, student to student when, that it's helpful to do that, especially with a smaller band.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
the
it,
jazz combos are there. It's a very analogous environment. If you can figure out a jazz combo sound, that small wind ensemble, small band, small wind ensemble thing gets a lot easier because it's the same stuff you're working on.
And you looks like near the end here you have a chapter on small marching bands.
Mhm.
I've had a small marching band my whole career. I've never had a marching band more than 70 kids. It's usually 30 wins kind of thing. And I know that's not. I mean, there's smaller bands than that, but when you're talking about four trumpets and that's kind of it. I
Right,
just know that loud is not in our wheelhouse, so
right.
we're not going to try to do that. Some other tips for people who are teaching small marching bands.
Yeah, I mean, the book goes into a little bit more detail on the writing side. Like, how do you write things to make it sound a little stronger? Because, like you said, if you have four trumpet parts, assuming you're doing like first, second, third, third, or maybe first, first, second, third, but frankly, when that second trumpet player takes a breath, that note is gone. If you're, and like you said, for the loud thing, like they have to breathe. The musicians have to breathe even a lot more when they're running around a football field. So, you've got to start to consider very carefully, like how much can they play and how much can I create a sound? How can I write in a range of the instrument and in such a way that we're not overstretching their sound so that it can't project well? How do we keep it sort of in the pocket so that it goes one direction? And then it talks a little bit too about like, how do you manage impact moments? Like you said, loud is not an option when you've got 30 wins. You just, volume impact isn't going to be a thing. So, can we craft an impact moment? A lot of, folks talk about like general effect. How do you craft an effective moment from some more intellectual stimuli? Is there a coordination element that creates an effect? Is there a contrast element that creates effect? It's not just play loud to make effect.
Yeah, soft is better than loud. I'll say it.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, everybody, it's called Small Band Big Sound by GIA Publications. The link is in the show notes. People should go check it out. Before we leave, just a couple kind of random questions to ask you. First of all, a name of another band director that you admire or that you think does a good job.
Someone who always comes to mind, who I think of very frequently, is that a close friend, Adam Gumbel. Dr. Gumbel, he's the director of athletic bands at Westchester University. And he also runs the Vivace summer camp. I help teach there. And I think I've known him now, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years. And his ability to adapt his teaching into brand new environments and come up with all kinds of new creative stuff for teaching never ceases to amaze me. And I have a lot of gumbelisms, we call them, in my
Mhm.
own teaching, where he's just really good at figuring out a situation and figuring out what evaluating a situation and figuring out like what do we need to do right now to make something better, whether it's teaching something or programming something or creating a new opportunity for students. Like he's just really phenomenal at that. He's an expert teacher.
Just sounds like somebody who gets it done.
He does.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Last question for you. What's a piece, or in this case, maybe a publishing company you think people should be checking out?
Oh, the publishing company, I'd go with Bravo Music.
Okay.
They caught my attention a few years ago, and it's a Japanese. So Brain Music is a Japanese-based publishing company, and Bravo Music is their like American-based subsidiary, and they do some outstanding music for small ensembles. I think it's related to like the structure of like how Japanese schools and music programs operate and their like sort of festival system. I'm not terribly familiar with it, but looking at the repertoire, it looks like that publishing company really gears their products towards that assessment environment and towards the size of bands they have. Like they have flex band music that's unlike most of what American publishers are doing, and it's really outstandingly well written music that has a lot of different options for flex band stuff that we don't find anywhere else. And also just their catalog of music is it's fun music, and there's a lot of good variety in it.
As a quick segue for anybody who has not heard it, if you want to, I did episode 214 with Nick Pierce, and it was the whole episode was about Japanese wind band music, and we featured a lot of the stuff from Bravo
Yep.
on there as well. So if people are interested in that, they should go check them out. Chris, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your time so much.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.